The bread was always picked up at exactly 6:47 a.m., not 6:45, not 6:50, 6:47. For 2 years, Margaret Kowalski noticed because she was the one who set the loaves aside every morning. 6 loaves of rye, dark, dense. The old country recipe her father had brought from Poland in 1949. She'd bake them fresh at 4 in the morning, let them cool for exactly 40 minutes, then wrap them in brown paper and set them on the counter beside the register. And at 6:47 a.m., a man would come in, middle-aged, unremarkable. He'd pay cash, say thank you, leave, every Tuesday and Friday, for 2 years. Margaret didn't think much about it. People have their routines, especially in Brighton Beach, especially immigrants, especially the older generation who remembered what it was like to line up for bread in the old country and never wanted to risk being late again. But looking back, and this is what kept her awake years later, she should have wondered why someone needed 6 loaves of rye bread twice a week, every week, with such mechanical precision, because no one eats that much bread, not even a large family. And this man lived alone. If you've ever run a small business, if you've ever known your customers by their orders rather than their names, you understand how people become part of the background, how routine makes them invisible. For Margaret Kowalski, the man who bought 6 loaves every Tuesday and Friday was just another customer, one of dozens who came through her bakery every day, until the morning he didn't come, and someone else came in his place. This story is based on documented KGB operational methods during the Cold War. Characters and specific events have been fictionalized, but the tradecraft described reflects confirmed Soviet intelligence practices from this period. Before we dive into this incredible story, subscribe to the channel. Tell me what city you're watching from. This is a fictional narrative. The characters and events are dramatized for educational purposes. Now grab your favorite drink, settle into a comfortable spot and pay attention. Stay alert. Another story of the Invisible War begins now. Are you ready? Let's go. I am Victor Hale. And now, come to my world. Margaret Kowalski opened Kowalski's Bakery in 1978. She was 32 years old. Single, no children. She'd worked in her father's bakery since she was 14, measuring flour, kneading dough, learning the temperatures and timing that separated good bread from mediocre bread. When her father died in 1977, he left her the building, a narrow storefront on Brighton Beach Avenue in Brooklyn. 2 stories. The bakery on the ground floor, a small apartment above it where Margaret lived alone. The neighborhood was heavily Russian. Soviet émigrés, Jewish families who'd left during the limited emigration periods. People who'd brought their language, their food, their suspicions with them. Brighton Beach was nicknamed Little Odessa. You could walk down the avenue and hear more Russian than English, see Cyrillic signs, smell the particular mix of cooking that came from that part of the world. Margaret fit in without quite belonging. Her family was Polish. Catholic, different language, different history, but close enough. She understood the culture of displacement, of keeping your head down, of building something small and reliable in a country that was large and sometimes unpredictable. The bakery was modest. 1 display case, a small counter, 6 small tables by the window. She sold bread, mostly, rye, pumpernickel, challah on Fridays, some pastries, coffee. Nothing fancy. Good quality, fair prices, the kind of place neighborhood people came to every day. She opened at 5:30 a.m., closed at 6 p.m., 7 days a week. It was exhausting. It was also stable. The mortgage was paid. The bills were manageable. She had regular customers, a routine, a life. And every Tuesday and Friday at 6:47 a.m., the man came for his 6 loaves of rye. His name, she learned eventually, was Mr. Petrov. At least that's what he told her. He was in his late 50s, average height, grey hair, glasses. He wore a long coat in winter, a lighter jacket in summer, always clean, always neat, always polite. He never made small talk, never lingered, just paid, took his bread, left. Margaret assumed he ran a boarding house, or had a large family, or maybe he froze the bread. People did that. Buy in bulk, store it, use it over time. She didn't ask. It wasn't her business. But she noticed the precision, the timing, The fact that in 2 years he'd never been late, never been early, never missed a pickup. 6:47 a.m., Tuesday and Friday, like clockwork. In a way, it was comforting. You could set your watch by Mr. Kalman Petrov. Margaret appreciated that kind of reliability. It meant one less thing to think about. His order was always ready. He always showed up. The transaction was always smooth. Until October the 12th, 1983, Tuesday morning. Margaret had the 6 loaves wrapped and ready by 6:40 a.m. She was behind the counter organizing receipts when the door opened at 6:47. But it wasn't Mr. Petrov. It was a younger man, maybe 35, dark hair, clean-shaven. He approached the counter without hesitation. "Dark, are you picking up for Mr. Petrov?" Just briefly. Then, yes, he couldn't come today. Handed him the wrapped loaves. He paid exact change. Said thank you in slightly accented English. Left. She watched him through the window. He walked quickly. Got into a car parked 2 storefronts down. Grey sedan. He placed the bread in the back seat, drove away. Margaret stood at the counter for a moment. Something felt off. Not wrong exactly. Just different. The man had known the order. 6 rye loaves. Dark. Hadn't asked. Hadn't clarified. Just stated it like someone who'd been told exactly what to get. And he paid exact change. Like he'd counted it out beforehand. Margaret returned to her work. Told herself it meant nothing. Mr. Petrov was sick. Sent someone in his place. Normal. But on Friday, Mr. Petrov didn't come either. A different man came instead. Older. 60s. Same lack of hesitation. Paid exact change. Left. Margaret watched him leave too. Different car, different direction. 2 substitutes in 1 week. Both knowing the order. Both knowing the timing. Both paying exact change. She thought about it through the weekend. Tried to construct explanations. Maybe Mr. Petrov had fallen ill. Maybe he'd gone to visit family. Maybe he'd asked neighbors to pick up his bread. All possible. October 18th. A third different man came. Younger. Maybe late 20s. Same pattern. Same precision. Margaret made a decision. When he paid, she asked, "Is Mr. Petrov all right? I haven't seen him in over a week." The young man looked at her calmly. "He's fine. Out of town. Asked me to pick up his order. When will he be back? I'm not sure. A few weeks, maybe." Left. Her hands were cold. 3 different men in 8 days. All picking up the same order. All at exactly the same time. All acting like they'd done it before, even though she'd never seen any of them. And none of them seemed surprised by the quantity. 6 loaves. Twice a week. Normal people would ask, 6 loaves? Are you sure? That's a lot of bread. These men didn't ask. Margaret went upstairs to her apartment that evening, made tea, sat at her small kitchen table, tried to think through what she was observing. Mr. Petrov had been coming for 2 years, always alone, always at the same time, always the same order, no variation. No conversation beyond basic transaction. And now, suddenly, he was gone, replaced by a rotation of different people, all maintaining the exact same routine, all demonstrating the same precision. It felt organized, coordinated, like a system. But a system for what? Margaret thought about the neighborhood, Brighton Beach, Little Odessa, a place where Soviet emigres mixed with long-time Brooklyn residents, a place where languages overlapped, where loyalties were sometimes unclear, where the Cold War existed not as abstract geopolitics, but as something present in the community, in families divided between those who'd left and those who'd stayed, in suspicions about who reported to who, in quiet surveillance that everyone knew about but didn't discuss openly. She thought about 6 loaves of bread, twice a week, picked up with mechanical precision for 2 years, and she thought about how little sense it made if the purpose was actually consuming the bread, unless the bread wasn't the point, unless the pickup was the point. Before we go further, think about this carefully. If you notice something unusual in your daily routine, something that suggests a pattern you don't understand, do you investigate? Do you ask questions? Or do you tell yourself it's none of your business and look away? Margaret Kowalski decided to pay attention. She started documenting. Nothing formal. Just notes in a small notebook she kept under the register. October 18, 3rd substitute. Male, late 20s, dark jacket. Paid exact change. October 21. Fourth, substitute. Male, mid-40s, grey coat. Same pattern. October 25. Fifth substitute. Male, 30s, glasses. Same timing, same order. She noted physical descriptions, what they wore, how they moved, whether they made eye contact, whether they seemed nervous or comfortable. They all seemed comfortable. That's what bothered her. They weren't covering for a sick friend. They were executing a routine they'd been trained for. Margaret also started paying attention to what happened after they left. Most mornings, she'd have a few minutes before the next customer arrived. She'd step outside, pretend to sweep the entrance, watch. The men always walked in the same direction, east on Brighton Beach Avenue. Then they'd turn onto different side streets. Sometimes she could see them get into cars. Sometimes they disappeared on foot, but they all moved with purpose. Like people who had somewhere specific to be, something specific to do. She thought about going to the police, but what would she say? That her regular customer had stopped coming and different people were picking up his bread? That wasn't a crime. That was barely unusual. She thought about asking other shop owners if they'd noticed anything, but Brighton Beach was a place where you didn't ask questions, where people minded their business, where suspicion could make you a target. So she kept watching, kept documenting, kept wrapping 6 loaves every Tuesday and Friday morning and handing them to strangers at exactly 6:47 a.m. November passed. December came. The substitutes continued. Never the same person twice in a row. Sometimes the same person would return after a few weeks, but always rotating, always changing. Margaret counted. In 3 months, 15 different people had picked up Mr. Crumb's, Petrov's order. 15 people maintaining one man's route. That wasn't a favor for a sick friend. That was an operation. And Margaret Kowalski's small bakery was somehow part of it. In January 1984, Margaret made a decision. She needed to talk to someone. Not the police. Not yet. Someone who might understand what she was seeing without thinking she was paranoid. She thought of her cousin, Anna. Anna's husband, Joseph, was a detective with the NYPD, Organized Crime Division. They lived in Queens. Margaret didn't see them often, but family was family. She called Anna, asked if they could meet for dinner. Anna said yes, suggested a restaurant in Sheepshead Bay, neutral ground, away from Brighton Beach. They met on a Sunday evening, January 15th. Cold. Snow on the ground. The restaurant was warm and loud, Polish food, comfortable. They talked about family first. Anna's children. Margaret's bakery, the usual catching up. Then Margaret said, "I need Joseph's advice about something I've noticed at work." Joseph looked up from his pierogi. "What kind of something?" Margaret explained, carefully. The regular customer, the 2-year routine, the sudden substitution, the rotating pickups, the 15 different people maintaining one order with mechanical precision. Joseph listened, asked questions. How long? How many people? What exactly was the order? Had she ever seen Mr. Crewman Chad? Petrov, after the substitution started, Margaret answered everything. Showed him the notebook she brought. Joseph read through it, looked at Anna, then at Margaret. "This is above my jurisdiction, but I know someone who handles different kinds of cases. Federal. Can I pass this along? Is it something?" Joseph chose his words carefully. "It's a pattern. And patterns like this, in Brighton Beach, with Soviet emigres, sometimes mean things that aren't immediately obvious. You think it's espionage? I think it's worth looking at." Margaret felt her stomach tighten. What do I do? Keep doing exactly what you've been doing. Don't change anything. Don't ask questions. Don't let anyone know you've noticed. Can you do that? Margaret thought about her small bakery, her quiet life, the routine she'd built. Yes. Joseph wrote down a name and number. If anything changes, if anyone approaches you, if you feel unsafe, call this number immediately. Put it in her purse. They finished dinner, said goodbye. Margaret drove back to Brighton Beach. Lay awake most of that night, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the building, the traffic outside, the occasional voices from the street, thinking about what it meant that her bakery, her father's bakery, was being used for something she didn't understand. 2 weeks later, 2 people came to visit her. Not at the bakery. At her apartment, Sunday evening. After she'd closed, there was a knock on the door. She looked through the peephole. Both in their 40s. Professional clothes. Serious expressions. She opened the door. They showed credentials. FBI. Special Agents Morrison and Chen. Margaret let them in. They sat at her small kitchen table. Morrison spoke first. Detective Brenner passed along your observations. We've reviewed you and we'd like to ask you some detailed questions. Offered coffee. They accepted. She made it. Sat down. They went through everything methodically. When had Mr. Petrov started coming? What was his exact routine? When did the substitutions begin? How many different people had she seen? Physical descriptions. Payment methods. Any conversation. Any deviation from pattern? Margaret answered everything calmly. Thoroughly. She'd been thinking about these questions for months. When she finished, Agent Chen spoke. You mentioned Mr. Petrov always paid cash. Exact change. Did you ever notice where the money came from? New bills? Old bills? Coins? Margaret thought. Usually older bills. Worn. Different denominations. Like he'd collected it from various places. Jai! Chen made a note. Morrison continued. In 2 years. Did Mr. Petrov ever buy anything other than the 6 rye loaves? Never. Did he ever come at a different time? Always 6:47 a.m., Tuesday and Friday. Did you ever see him interact with anyone else in the bakery? Look at anyone? Acknowledge anyone? Margaret thought carefully. No. He came in, conducted his transaction, left immediately. The building your bakery is in. Are there other tenants? Other businesses? A tailor shop next door. A butcher 2 doors down. Apartments above the commercial spaces. Do you know the tenants? Some. Not well. It's a transient neighborhood. People come and go. The agents exchanged a glance. Morrison leaned forward slightly. Ms. Kowalski, we believe your bakery has been used as part of a dead drop operation. The bread purchase is legitimate. That's part of what makes it effective. But the timing, the precision, the substitution pattern, these indicate coordination between multiple parties using your business as a neutral exchange point. Exchange of what? We don't know yet. But the pattern matches known Soviet intelligence protocols. Mr. Petrov, which is likely not his real name, was probably a coordinator. The people picking up the bread are assets or couriers. The timing allows for surveillance, detection. The rotation prevents any single individual from being tracked consistently. And I've been part of it for 2 years. You've been unknowingly facilitating it, which is precisely why it works. Legitimate businesses. Legitimate transactions. Nothing obviously suspicious. Margaret looked at her hands. They were shaking slightly. Chen spoke gently. You're not in trouble. You had no way of knowing. But now that we do know, we need your help. What kind of help? Continue exactly as you've been. Prepare the 6 loaves. Hand them over at 6:47 a.m. Act normally. If anyone asks questions or seems suspicious of your behavior, maintain your routine. We'll be watching. For how long? Morrison answered. We're building a case. These operations take time to fully map. But your cooperation is essential. Margaret nodded slowly. Will I be safe? We have no indication that you're at personal risk. As far as they know, you're just a baker who happens to have a regular customer. Maintaining that perception is important. They talked for another 30 minutes about safety protocols, about what to watch for, about how to contact them if anything changed. When they left, Margaret sat alone in her kitchen. The apartment was very quiet. She thought about her father, about the bakery he'd built, about the recipes he'd brought from Poland, about the pride he'd taken in feeding the neighborhood. And now those recipes, that bread, was being used for something he never would have approved of. She went to bed, didn't sleep well. But the next morning she woke at 3:30 a.m., went downstairs, mixed the dough, shaped 6 loaves of dark rye, baked them, wrapped them, set them on the counter. And at 6:47 a.m. a man she'd never seen before came in, asked for 6 loaves of rye, dark, paid exact change, left. Margaret watched him go. Then returned to her work. Because that's what you do. You keep going, you maintain the routine. Even when the routine has become something else entirely. The next 3 months were strange in a way that's hard to describe. Everything looked normal. Margaret opened the bakery, baked bread, served customers, closed at 6, went upstairs, repeated. But nothing was normal, because she was watching now, paying attention in a way she hadn't before. The men who picked up Mr. Petrov's order continued to rotate. She documented each one. Clothing, demeanor, time of arrival, always 6:47, never a minute early or late. She also started noticing other things. Small things she'd never paid attention to before. There was a man who bought coffee every morning at 7:10 a.m., always sat at the same table by the window, always faced the street, always read a newspaper for exactly 15 minutes, then left. There was a woman who came in at 6:30 a.m., bought one challah roll, ate it at the counter, never ordered coffee, never spoke beyond her order, always left before 6:47. Margaret had assumed they were regulars, people who liked their routines, but now she wondered if they were part of the pattern, if they were watching, monitoring, making sure the 6:47 pickup went smoothly. She mentioned this to Agent Morrison during one of their brief check-ins. He met her in a parking lot 3 blocks from the bakery. She gave him her updated notes, described the other potential observers. Morrison listened carefully. You have good instincts. We've identified some of those people. You're right to notice them. How much longer? Margaret asked. We're close. Weeks, not months. And then... and then it ends. Professionally. Quietly. Kept baking. Kept watching. And on a Tuesday morning in late March, she noticed something different. The man who came at 6:47, she'd seen him twice before, several weeks apart, hesitated after she handed him the bread. Just for a moment, looked at her directly. Thank you. Excellent bread. Always consistent. His English was perfect, but his emphasis was slightly wrong. The stress on consistent was too deliberate, like he was commenting on something beyond the bread itself. Margaret nodded. I take pride in my work. That's clear. He left. Margaret's heart was pounding. She stepped outside, pretended to adjust the sidewalk sign, watched him walk east, turn onto a side street, disappear. Then she went to the payphone on the corner, called Morrison's direct line. He spoke to me, more than usual, commented on consistency. Morrison's voice was sharp, exact words. She repeated the, Did you deviate from your normal response? No. I said I take pride in my work. Good. Go back inside. Act normally. We're moving the timeline up. The line went dead. Margaret went back to the bakery. Served the morning customers. Tried to stay calm. Couldn't quite manage it. That evening, Agent Chen came to her apartment, briefed her. The man who'd spoken to her was a known KGB handler. His comment was likely a test, seeing if Margaret was aware, seeing if she reacted. Did I pass? Margaret asked. You did exactly right. But it means they're cautious, possibly aware that something has changed in the broader operational environment. What happens now? We're executing within 48 hours. After that, you'll be contacted for a formal debriefing, but your active cooperation will be complete. Will you tell me what this was all about? Chen looked at her. Some of it, not everything. Margaret nodded. That was fair. She'd been part of something, but she wasn't entitled to know everything just because she'd been used. Thank you, Miss Kowalski. You've been very brave. She felt tired. The arrests happened on a Thursday, not a pickup day, not at the bakery. Margaret read about it in the newspaper. Brief article. Page 4. Federal operation in Brooklyn. Multiple arrests related to espionage activities. No names. No details. Ongoing investigation. She folded the paper, set it aside. Opened the bakery. Baked bread. At 6:47 a.m. on Friday, no one came for the 6 rye loaves. She waited. 6:50. 6:55. 7 o'clock. No one came. Margaret wrapped the loaves, put them in the display case, sold them individually throughout the day to regular customers. The following Tuesday, she didn't bake the 6 dark rye loaves. Baked her normal quantities instead. No one came at 6:47. The pattern was broken. The operation was over. Agent Morrison came to see her the following week, brought Agent Chen. They sat at her kitchen table one last time. Morrison briefed her. The bakery had been used as a coordination point. The precise timing allowed different couriers to confirm operational status without direct communication. If the pickup happened at 6:47, it meant the operation was proceeding normally. If someone was late or didn't show, it indicated a problem. The bread itself wasn't significant. It was the transaction, the presence at a specific time, the routine that had been so reliable for 2 years that any deviation would be noticed. Mr. Petrov? Margaret asked. Arrested. Real name classified. He was a coordinator, mid-level intelligence officer. Been operating in New York for 6 years. And the people who picked up the bread? Couriers. Assets. Some arrested. Some under surveillance. Some outside our jurisdiction. What was being moved? Morrison paused. Information, documents, intelligence on various U.S. TV government activities. Your bakery was one node in a larger network. Small, but important. Margaret absorbed that. Her small bakery, her father's recipes, used to coordinate espionage against the country that had given them refuge. Will this be public? She asked. Some details will emerge eventually. Your name won't. For your safety and for operational security. They thanked her. Left. Margaret sat alone. That evening she went downstairs, stood in the quiet bakery, looked at the counter where she'd set out 6 loaves twice a week for 2 years. Thought about Mr. Petrov, about his precise timing, his emotionless transactions, the way he'd become part of her routine without her ever questioning why. Thought about the 15 different faces that had replaced him, the rotation, the coordination, the system that had operated invisibly in her small business. And thought about how close she'd been to something invisible for so long, how routine had made her blind, until it didn't. Margaret Kowalski continued running the bakery for another 12 years. She never baked 6 dark rye loaves at once again. The order felt tainted somehow. Marked. She thought about the story sometimes, about telling someone, her cousin Anna, a friend, anyone, but she didn't. It was classified. And even if it weren't, who would believe that a small Polish bakery in Brighton Beach had been used by the KGB? She retired in 1996, sold the bakery to a young Russian couple who wanted to keep it a traditional establishment. She moved to Pennsylvania, lived near her cousin's family, watched grandnieces and grandnephews grow up, and sometimes, late at night, she'd think about those mornings, the dark loaves wrapped in brown paper, the men who came at exactly 6:47 a.m., the mechanical precision, the invisible coordination. Think about how thin the boundary was between ordinary commerce and extraordinary conflict. Think about how her father's bread, made with pride, with care, with recipes brought from the old country, had been used for purposes he never could have imagined. The Cold War was fought in embassies and military installations. That's what the newspapers covered. That's what people remember. But it was also fought in small bakeries, in routine transactions. In the space between 6:47 a.m. and 6:48 a.m., in the precision that makes something reliable enough to build an operation around. Margaret Kowalski had been a baker, someone who woke early and mixed dough and fed her neighborhood. That's what she'd thought her work was. But for 2 years she'd been something else without knowing it, a piece of infrastructure, a coordination point, a reliable element in an intelligence operation that used her routine as cover. And when she noticed, when the pattern broke and she paid attention, her observations helped close a network that had been running for years. Not because she was a spy, not because she was trained, but because she paid attention when something changed, because she maintained records, because she asked quiet questions, because she recognized that precision isn't always innocent. If you're still here, if Margaret's story resonated with you, it's because you understand something essential, that the most significant operations often happen in the most ordinary places. But small businesses, daily routines, regular transactions can become infrastructure for things their owners never intended. That paying attention matters, that deviations from pattern mean something. That when 15 different people maintain one person's routine with mechanical precision, someone should notice. Margaret Kowalski noticed. After 2 years, after 15 substitutes, After months of precise 67 a.m. pickups that never varied, she noticed because the pattern became impossible to ignore once it broke. And because she noticed, she documented. And because she documented, she reported. And because she reported, an operation ended. The Cold War wasn't won by heroes alone. It was won by bakers and milkmen and janitors and clerks, by people who maintained routines so consistent that deviation became visible, who recognized when their business was being used for something they hadn't agreed to, by ordinary citizens who noticed the extraordinary hiding inside the ordinary. This is the story of one of them, a woman who baked bread, who opened early and closed late, who took pride in consistency, whose consistency became the very thing that allowed her to recognize when something was wrong. A small bakery in Brighton Beach. 6 loaves of dark rye. 6:47 a.m. Tuesday and Friday. For 2 years, it served the KGB, and then it didn't, because someone was paying attention. And here we come to the end of another story. Leave a like and tell me in the comments where you're from. Sometimes I read these stories to my granddaughter before bed. She always asks me if they're real. I answer that they're possible. If you want to have these stories in your hands, I've compiled some of them into a book. It's there in the link pinned in the comments if you want. My nephew, Daniel, has been helping me with the recordings. He insists that I share these stories with the world. He says they can't just stay in my memory. If you want to follow me through these stories, subscribe to the channel. My name is Victor Hale, and this is my contribution.